Hello, welcome to 8.9 News. I'm Ffinlo Costain. Peter Byck is the celebrated director of Carbon Cowboys, who now brings us a new four-part documentary series, Roots So Deep, which follows adaptive cattle farmers and a group of scientists conducting groundbreaking research into the costs and benefits of grazing in harmony with nature. I spoke to Peter Byck and I started by asking him, what was the elevator pitch for Roots So Deep?
Basically, we found farmers who were rebuilding their soils by the way they were grazing their animals faster than anybody had ever seen in a textbook, the soil building. And so I wanted to do research to find out what was going on. And so we found farmers and we did a documentary. And that's what Roots So Deep is all about.
Through the filming, what did you learn that surprised you most?
So we have adaptive farmers on one side of the fence and conventional farmers on the other side of the fence. And it's 5 pairs in the Southeast US. I had been told that the conventional neighbors thought the adaptive neighbors who were doing something different were crazy. But what I found out was, even if they thought they were crazy, they were very curious. And that curiosity is the opportunity for communication, the opportunity to get people talking. So that was the thing that kind of blew my mind early on in the project, to hear from the conventional neighbors, oh, I watch what's going on and I see it's really good, but they're just basically too polite to ask. And the adaptive farmer, who's usually a first-generation farmer, and the conventional farmers are multi-generation farmers, many layers of family. The adaptive farmer, being new to the area, new to the farming, would never presume to tell somebody else how to do it. They know it's better. They know they've saved money. They know that their animals are healthier, but they would just never presume. So because we got to make a documentary, I got to say, hey, farmers, would you guys talk? And so we started a conversation that had enormous implications for both of them. It's really, really cool. That I did not know would happen in the filming at all.
So is every farmer going to need a documentary filmmaker to bridge that gap?
Well, when you make a documentary, you hope that lots of people will see it. So we're hoping our documentary works for lots of farmers and lots of conversations. And by looking at what's happening in our social media world, the numbers of people that are signing on to be followers of our channels, it's significant. We've had 53 million views of our short clips leading up to our release of the film. We've had 360,000 followers, all since August of 2023. And so that's what you hope, is that people come to it, and that we do a good enough job marketing that people will come to it. Now, documentary filmmakers who are celebrating, who are trying to bring people together, are gold. They're really important. There's other documentary films that want to sort of point fingers, blame, and stuff like that. That's not going to elicit change. So it depends on what kind of documentary filmmaker.
Now, Peter, there's a lot of film here and it's fascinating. It's a wonderful watch. But just tell me about one or two of the characters in Roots So Deep and what for you makes them so special.
So we have 10 farm families and 5 farm pairs. And every single farm family, every single farmer is really good on camera. That's just pure luck. There's nothing anywhere close to that, because we're doing a science project first. So we looked for the adaptive farmers along the way, and then we asked their neighbor if we could do the same science, and we got all the neighbors saying yes. So it's just pure luck. Cooper and Katie Hurst were the first farmers we filmed, or actually the first farmers I actually met. I actually had met them years before. And they're this amazing couple, very conservative. We joke about how I'm not and they are. And Cooper, said by the end of this project, he wants me to be a member of the National Rifle Association, the NRA. And I joke with him and say, hey, if you were one of my friends, you would have already signed me up, as a joke, right? But we know we're different on a lot of levels, but we're so similar on, to me, the most important level, which is land, soil health, animal well-being, wildlife rehabilitations. Those are the things that matter. And so Cooper and Katie Hurst are just this amazing couple. They're about 12 years into their journey on adaptive farming. And across the fence are the Fergusons. They're 4th-generation farmers. The dad and the mom are in their 80s. The son's in his mid-40s. And the son actually lives on farm. The parents live in town, really small town, Woodville, Mississippi. And I consider these farmers friends. Like I'm on tour right now. I just went around thanking them again. I just went to 6 of the farm pairs just to say thank you for being a part of this. And it's been years since we finished filming. So so far, all the reviews we've seen, all the comments we've seen is people really, really like these farmers, which I'm happy about because, I don't want to make their lives anything other than good.
Now, as you mentioned, Peter, this film work has run alongside a decade of research into adaptive multi-paddock grazing. Why were you so certain that AMP grazing was worth all that effort even before you got started?
When I first stepped onto a farm that was practicing these methods, we can call it AMP grazing, we can call it mob grazing, we can call it strip grazing, we can call it holistic plan grazing, we can call it rational grazing, whatever. Step in it, they're all slightly different. They all have nuance for sure. But when I stepped onto that land, it smells amazing. It sounds amazing. And you look across the fence and there's just not that kind of life. And then when I started stepping on both sides of the fence, the soil's actually squishy on the adaptive side, and it's very hard on the conventional side. The animals look different. So it was clearly something was different. The farmers were getting themselves out of debt. They were rejuvenating their water cycles. They were seeing wildlife on their land that they hadn't seen for a long time. They were seeing grasses growing that people hadn't seen in that county in 80 years. Those were the pieces of data that said to me, this is important. I was looking at it through the lens of climate change and saying, well, we just got to measure their carbon. But I met a lot of scientists that then became part of the team, and they're like, no, you can't just measure the carbon. You have to measure the methane. You have to measure the nitrous oxide. So I learned a lot about it's not just that. And so I was being taught by individual scientists for a year. Well, you got to measure the birds. You got to measure the microbial life. You got to measure the forage production, the nutrient density of the forage, and how much of the land is covered by that forage. You have to measure the greenhouse gases. So that's how our team got together. But the reason we all got together was because all of us had been on these farms, and you just viscerally know something's better. But the fact that farmers were getting themselves out of debt because they were producing so much forage just by the way they were managing their animals, heavy hit, let most of the farm rest most of the time, like centralize their animals, move them once a day, manure and urine evenly spread, move on to the next thing, and then most of the farm's resting. And that regrowth of all that plant life is what was sucking down the CO2. Plant burps out the oxygen for us, puts the carbon in the ground. That's why we worked so hard and so long, because we knew something was going on. We just didn't know what. We didn't know if it was going to be a climate solution or whether it was going to just be a less bad way of producing cattle.
Clearly, climate change and biodiversity regeneration are both terribly important issues, and the research itself is super important. But there's so much misinformation around agriculture and often conflict between environmentalists and farmers. Why was it that you chose to translate this work into a series of films? What do films achieve that raw science doesn't?
Well, I'm a filmmaker, so I look at things that way, right? I'm not a scientist. I became a wrangler of scientists. I became a fundraiser for science, but I'm not a scientist. I learn a ton from my colleagues every day. It's been an amazing journey. I probably have earned a PhD somewhere along the way, just not properly. So I'm not Dr. Byck. My brother's Dr. Byck, but he's an orthopedic surgeon. I just went off on a tangent, Ffinlo, and I forgot your question.
No worries. It was
the misinformation. The misinformation. So industrial agriculture is destructive. It is extractive. It is damaging soils at an astronomical rate. If that's the right word, at a huge rate. Our rivers are full of soil. Our rivers are full of fertilizer that didn't need to be applied in such huge amounts. And so that's real. The idea that regenerative agriculture could be a solution is really a strange thought for folks who've been really kind of pointing the finger at industrial agriculture. And the idea that cattle could be a climate solution is just mind-blowing and very hard. There's just people that just won't believe it. They won't. They've seen the damage of industrial agriculture, the industrial livestock production, and they think that's all there is. And they're right about the destruction of the industrial model. The destruction within the industrial model is massive. It's massive. We did a paper, our first paper as our science team came out in 2016, where we measured the carbon in the soil erosion from the growing of the corn, the growing of the soy that becomes animal feedstock, it becomes ethanol. And it's massive. It's much more of a greenhouse gas warmer than the methane emissions from the animals. So I'm there with all that. But what we found is if things are done regeneratively, it is quite a massive solution. So it should be good news. But for some folks who are committed to people not eating meat, it doesn't seem to be good news yet, but it's new. We were the first science team to do this massive, rigorous science. People have done pieces of what we've been doing, no question. But to do it all together, I think we were the first group to really put it all together in one project on one organized, paired study. So it's a long road, but we're just starting. This, as a friend of mine says, this isn't the finish line. This is the starting line. Yeah, it took us a decade, but here we go.
Now, climate change is where much of the policy interest lies, but carbon policies are mostly focused on emissions. So from the work that you've done here, what do you think's wrong with that approach?
We looked at the system as much as we could afford, right? And so there's 3 greenhouse gases that are important on an agricultural setting, on land that's growing food. And for us, it's grazing land is what we studied. So you've got methane from the cows. There's no question that that's a greenhouse gas warmer. You've got nitrous oxide coming out of the soils, coming from the fact that the cow's urine is helping produce it. It spikes after a rainstorm. It's incredibly potent greenhouse gas. There's no question that that's a warmer. And so and then the carbon dioxide, if the carbon's being brought down, that's a cooler, right? You got warming from methane and nitrous oxide, you got cooling from the CO2 coming down, the carbon being stored in the soil. If you just look at the methane alone, you'll see warming, but it's not the whole picture. It's not nature. It's not the truth. And if you just look at carbon, you'll see cooling in a healthy system. You'll see emissions in an unhealthy system. That's just part of it. That's not the whole truth. So you have to look at the warming of the greenhouse gases that warm, the methane, the nitrous oxide that are coming out of a healthy system. These farmers produce more animals on the same land. They will have more methane. They will have more nitrous oxide. But the amount of carbon that's coming down eclipses the warming. The cooling of the carbon far eclipses the warming. So net, it's cooling. It just is. And that's what we found in the Southeast US. Will we find that in Scotland? Will we find that in France? Will we find that in Australia, New Zealand, Canada? Let's hunt. We're now in the Northern Great Plains, a very different ecosystem from the Southeast US. Southeast is long growing season, very warm, very wet, usually. Massive drought last year. In the Northern Great Plains, it's cool, short growing season, and dry for the most part, or really dry like it was last year. And so we feel like now to see what's going to happen in that research, which is, we're years away from knowing that data, we'll have a good sense of 2 very different ecosystems to understand where it's working better. Is it not working? We don't know. We got to do the science.
That was Peter Byck, the director of Roots So Deep. More news on our website, 8.9.com. That's all for now. We're back soon. Thanks for watching.